My sister cheated on my boyfriend of 8 years, and they got married. Now she has big news. At my wedding, her parents announced it. Ever since I can remember, my younger sister was the star of the family. She got the princess treatment the moment she popped into this world. I was only 5 years old, but I could already sense the shift in our home's atmosphere. It went from a balanced family vibe to a one-kid show starring her. My parents went all out for her from the get-go. She had the best nursery ever. It was filled with the fanciest crib, the softest blankets, and toys that were more fit for a showroom than a baby's room. I, on the other hand, got the basics and nothing more. My stuff was mostly hand-me-downs or whatever was on sale. Don't get me wrong, I didn't lack necessities, but the difference in how we were treated was stark and clear as we grew older. The trend continued. Birthdays were a big deal. Her parties were the talk of the town. Theme decorations, entertainers, and a guest list that included not just kids but important adults in our parents' lives. My birthdays were mostly quiet affairs. Maybe a cake, some balloons, and a small family gathering. It wasn't that I wanted lavish parties, but a little bit of that attention wouldn't have hurt. School life was another arena where the differences were glaring. She always had the newest clothes and gadgets. I remember. I felt a bit embarrassed with my worn-out backpack and clothes that clearly were hand-me-downs at school. She was popular, and I was the quiet kid who read a lot. Teachers would often praise her for her charm and outgoing nature, while my good grades usually went unnoticed unless it was parent-teacher meeting day. This unequal treatment even seeped into how our parents supported our interests. She wanted to take ballet, and I wanted to play soccer. "Why don't you try something less rough?" they'd say. It was always about keeping her in a bubble of perfection. Even holidays were no exception. Christmas was all about what she wanted. The living room would be filled with her wish list items. Come Christmas morning, I got gifts too. Sure, but they were more like afterthoughts. It was like they ticked off a list for me, but for her, they sought to make every wish come true. Emotionally, things were just as skewed. Any achievement of hers was celebrated with. She was really enthusiastic about everything. She got a part in the school play, and then she wanted to take everyone out for dinner. I got used to downplaying my own achievements, because I knew they wouldn't cause much of a stir. It wasn't outright neglect, but it felt pretty close. The real kicker was how manipulative she became as we got older. She knew she was the favorite and played that card any chance she got. If we ever got into a squabble, guess who was expected to apologize first? Yep, me. When I tried to bring up how unfair it was, my parents would shut it down with the classic, "She's younger. Let it go." I tried to find my own space and things I could do that she couldn't touch or taint. I got into writing. It was my escape. It was a world where I could control what happened and who mattered. My parents didn't really get it, but it wasn't something she could overshadow, so they let me be. Things really started to come to a head during our teenage years. As we entered our teenage years, we both started to carve out our identities. She was the life of every party and the center of every event, while I was the observer and chronicler. Our paths diverged so much that we barely spoke at home. It was like living with a stranger who shared your last name and nothing else. It's not easy living with a sister who's treated like royalty. I've learned that from experience. As we entered our teenage years, my sister's entitled attitude didn't just grow, it exploded. She had always been the favorite, but now she wielded her status like a queen in her court, and we were all just subjects. She had this way of walking into a room as if she owned it. At home, this meant that whatever she wanted, she got, without question, a new phone, a late curfew, and so on. Meanwhile, I had to negotiate like a diplomat for even the smallest freedoms or upgrades. Her sense of entitlement wasn't limited to tangible things either. She demanded attention and got it in heaps. Our parents hung on her every word, laughed at her jokes, and basked in her social success. I swear you'd think she invented the wheel the way they bragged about every little thing she did. School was her domain. She became even more popular, and it wasn't just because she was fun or charming. It was also because she knew how to manage her image and people around her. Her birthday parties were legendary. The parties she threw became legendary. I remember one year she threw a massive party that was literally the talk of the school for months. People were desperate to get invites. My own were more like courtesy copies. It would look bad if I wasn't invited. She had a curated image. She always had the latest styles, the newest phone, and the coolest accessories. If I ever got something nice, it was usually after she'd gotten it first or deemed it unworthy. I felt like her shadow in her collection. Even in the way I dressed, my wardrobe was mostly filled with her hand-me-downs that were still better than anything new I could afford on my own. Her academic life was another stage for her performance. She wasn't just good at school, she was good at making sure everyone knew it. When she got an A, it wasn't just a good grade, it was a triumph. Meanwhile, I maintained a solid, she got by with a little help from her parents, who were her biggest fans and promoters. If she was in a school play, they would attend every performance and invite extended family and friends, turning it into a mini fan convention. If I was in the same play, they would say, "Oh, make sure to watch your sister. She has such a significant role." Then there were the family gatherings, which were showcases for her to shine. She would monopolize conversations. She charmed relatives with exaggerated stories of her exploits, leaving me often relegated to the sidelines, chiming in with supportive laughter or nods. It was exhausting, but any attempt to share my own experiences was quickly overshadowed by another of her captivating tales. But her entitlement wasn't just annoying, it was destructive. She had a knack for twisting situations to her advantage. One time, we both had our eyes on the same dress for a family wedding. I saw it first, but by the time when we went shopping, she threw a fit about how it was the only dress that worked for her. Our parents caved, like a house of cards. I ended up with a backup option, which was fine, but it was the principle of the thing. She wanted it, so she got it. Her manipulative skills weren't just limited to our parents. She had a way of turning friends against each other if it suited her. Her group of friends was more like her court, where she was the unchallenged queen. I once saw her at one of her big parties, where she made two of her so-called best friends argue with each other over something minor just to entertain the rest of her group. It was all a game to her. The worst part was that if there was ever a conflict or a problem, I was the one who had to apologize or make concessions. She always told me to be understanding, or that she didn't mean it like that, you know how she is. It didn't matter. The situation and the outcome were the same. She was right, and I needed to adjust. Living with her growing sense of entitlement was like walking on eggshells, but the eggshells were rigged with explosives. Any wrong step or failure to play along with her version of reality was met with drama, and the drama was always somehow my fault for not supporting her or for not being the good big sister I was in my senior year of high school. I was trying to balance the stress of upcoming college applications with the everyday drama that seemed my sister was off on her own little adventure, socializing like crazy. She had a growing entourage and her parties were more lavish than ever. Her demands were getting increasingly outrageous. My parents were as blind as ever to the imbalance. They were too busy admiring their little star to notice what was going on. During this time, I had been dating Jake for about 2 years. He was my rock, the calm and the storm of my home life. He knew all about the family dynamics, having witnessed more than his fair share of my sisters. He was supportive, caring, and, most importantly, mine. Or so I thought. The lead up to the disaster began innocuously enough. Jake and I were planning to go to the same college, dreaming of escaping our small town and starting fresh together. We had it all mapped out. We'd study hard, earn our degrees, and build a life together, away from the constant drama that defined my family life. But as senior year progressed, I noticed a shift in Jake's behavior. He became distant and distracted, and we discussed our future plans less and less. I thought it was just pre-OL nerves and the pressure of finals, but then the night of the big blowout came. It was supposed to be a typical weekend party at my house hosted by my sister. The house was decked out, the music was blaring, and there were people everywhere. I wasn't really in the party mood, but I thought I'd stick close to Jake and see how things went halfway through the night. I looked for him but couldn't find him. I checked upstairs, thinking maybe he'd gone to use the bathroom and got caught up talking to someone. That's when I heard voices from my sister's room. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was her room, after all. She was probably just showing off her latest shopping haul. I thought I heard Jake's laugh, but it was coming from behind her closed door. My heart sank. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe it was a group hangout, and I was overreacting. I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked again, harder. The talking stopped, and the door opened a crack. There was my sister, looking like she'd been caught, but too arrogant to care. Behind her, I could see Jake. His expression was a mix of guilt and... "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were just talking," my sister said, her tone dismissive. "Yeah, just catching up," Jake added, but he couldn't meet my eyes. The room felt hot, the air thick with betrayal. The confrontation was chaotic, with tears and accusations flying. My sister, as usual, turned on her charm, playing the victim and insisting it was all a big misunderstanding. Jake tried to explain, but nothing he said made sense. The aftermath was brutal. I broke up with Jake that night, not just because he'd cheated, but because of who he'd cheated with. My sister had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I couldn't even look at her, let alone speak to her. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way. For what? A moment of thrill to prove she could have anyone she wanted, even my boyfriend, my parents. They were useless. They tried to mediate, suggesting we all sit down and talk it out like it was just a minor disagreement. "She's your sister," they said, as if that excused her actions. Family is forever, but I couldn't accept it, not this time. After the fallout with my sister and Jake, things spiraled pretty quickly. It was like a line of dominoes had been knocked over in my life, and I was just watching them fall one after the other. The entire fiasco with Jake and my sister was the final straw. That was the moment I decided my sister was, in my mind, dead to me. In the weeks following that disaster of a party, I lived in a fog. Everything felt numb and unreal, like I was walking through a dream or, more accurately, a nightmare. I couldn't face my sister at home. Every time I saw her, I felt the hurt and betrayal rush back. She seemed to carry on as if nothing had happened. She was still the old child, unscathed and untouchable. I withdrew even more from my family. I spent most of my time either locked in my room or at a friend's house. My parents tried to intervene. They suggested family therapy, thinking it could mend what was broken. But how could therapy fix this? How could it erase the image of my boyfriend and my sister together? How could it make me trust again? The hurt and betrayal came rushing back. She seemed to carry on as if nothing had happened. Still, the olden child was unscathed and untouchable. I withdrew even more from my family, spending most of my time either locked in my room or at a friend's house. My parents tried to intervene. They suggested family therapy, thinking it could mend what was broken. But how could therapy fix this? How could it erase the image of my boyfriend and my sister together? How could it make me trust again? I just couldn't see myself sitting in a therapist's office, talking about my feelings, while they sat there playing the victim. I told my parents in no uncertain terms that there was no way I was going to play happy families. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding, it was a betrayal of the worst kind. My parents didn't push it too much after I blew up at them. I think they finally understood how deep the wound went, or maybe they just decided to let it go. I was always their priority anyway, so I decided to focus on my sister. She seemed to love the attention and played the misunderstood princess perfectly. I was counting down the days until I could leave, start fresh, and put as much distance as possible between me and my sister. Then the college acceptance letter came. I'd been accepted to a school a few states away, which was far enough to make random visits unlikely. I started packing my things. And leaving home was bittersweet. I was leaving behind everything familiar, but I was also leaving behind so much pain. My mom cried when I left, and my dad gave me a stiff hug. My sister gave a half-hearted goodbye, as if she was still trying to figure out how to play the victim in my departure. Starting college was like breathing fresh air for the first time in months. I threw myself into my studies and made new friends who knew nothing of my past or my family drama. I relished it. I was excited to start college because it meant I could be just another student, not the girl whose sister stole her boyfriend. However, moving on wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. I still felt the effects of what happened, and it was hard to trust new people. I kept waiting for them to betray me like Jake and my sister had. My relationship with my boyfriend was even harder. I dated a bit, but nothing serious. I was still afraid of being hurt again, so I didn't want to get too serious. As for my family, our communication dwindled to occasional calls and texts. My parents always asked about my return. I always had an excuse for why I couldn't go back, like schoolwork, exams, or a trip with friends. Years passed, and the pain of the betrayal dulled a bit. I heard through the grapevine, aka my mom, that my sister had married Jake. They even invited me to the wedding, but I didn't go. That chapter of my life was closed. She was still dead to me, no matter who she married. Graduation came and my parents attended. It was a difficult visit, full of awkward silences and forced conversations. My sister didn't come, she was too busy with her new life. After college, I moved even further away, taking a job on the opposite coast. It was a fresh start in a new city where no one knew my history. I built a life there, found a career I loved, and eventually met someone. He was kind and understanding. When I finally told him about my past, he didn't judge. He just listened. It took years, but I learned to trust again and to love again. My relationship with my family never fully recovered, though I kept in touch with my parents. It was always superficial. As for my sister, she remained a person from my past, someone I used to know but no longer recognized. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if cutting her off was too extreme. Then I remember the pain and the betrayal. I know I made the right choice for me. Protecting myself had to come first. If that meant cutting ties, then so be it. I had to cut ties with my sister. I didn't cut her off because I wanted to punish her. I did it to save myself. I needed to move on from a betrayal that had hurt me deeply. I did move on, but it was slow. I built a life for myself, and I didn't let anyone else in. Getting married was supposed to be one of the happiest times in my life. Planning my wedding was like sketching out dreams on paper and watching them come true. In the form of flower arrangements, venue bookings, and dress fittings. But even as I planned my perfect day, the shadow of my past, specifically, my sister, loomed over it like an uninvited cloud. My fiancé knew all about the history with my sister. He was my rock, always there with a kind word or a listening ear whenever the stress of wedding planning got tangled up with family drama. He understood why my sister wasn't on the guest list and supported that decision without question. As the wedding day drew near, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I was eager to start my new life with Mark, but I dreaded the inevitable family complications. My parents had been surprisingly okay with most of my decisions regarding the wedding, but the issue of my sister was a sticking point. They kept suggesting I reconsider and invite her for the family's sake, but I stood firm. After all that had happened, I wasn't willing to have her there. The big day arrived, and pomp and circumstance. I had dreamed of the venue being a beautiful garden blooming with the flowers of late spring. The air would be filled with the scent of roses and jasmine, like walking into a living fairy tale with twinkling lights strung from trees and the gentle hum of music in the background. Our friends and family were gathered, chatting happily as they awaited the ceremony. I was in the bridal suite putting on the finishing touches with my bridesmaids. My mom knocked on the door and came in looking nervous. "Honey, I really wish you'd reconsider about your sister," she began, her voice trembling a bit. It would mean so much to have her here. I took a deep breath, fixing my gaze on my reflection in the mirror. Mom, we've been over this. She's made her choices, and I've made mine. Today is about me and Mark, not her. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she left it at that, giving me a tight smile before leaving to take her seat. The ceremony was everything I had hoped it would be. Mark looked handsome as ever, with his eyes glistening with emotion as I walked down the aisle. We exchanged vows, and despite the swell of emotions, our voices were steady. We were pronounced husband and wife, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. We were married, and it had been perfect. However, the reception was another story. We had just finished our first dance and were sitting down for dinner when my dad asked. I nodded, expecting the usual fatherly expressions of pride and joy. Instead, he took the microphone and turned the attention to my sister. We were all thrilled for my daughter and Mark, but I'd like to take a moment to talk about someone who couldn't be here today. He began, and my heart sank. He went on to talk about my sister, her recent struggles, how she wished she could be here, and how she recently lost her baby. He asked us to think of her tonight. I felt my face flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Whispers rippled through the room as guests turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and sympathy. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Dad, please. I interrupted. Today is about me and Mark. Let's keep it that way. Dad looked taken aback, but he handed the microphone back to the DJ and sat down without another word. The mood had shifted. The air now tinged with tension. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to focus on the guests who were there to celebrate with us on the joy of the day, but the incident with my dad cast a long shadow over everything. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, offering silent support in the turbulent sea of emotions. Later during the toasts, my best friend gave a speech about friendship and loyalty. Her words were a subtle nod to the journey I'd been through. They were exactly what I needed. I found myself laughing and crying in equal measure. The wedding was beautiful, and despite the hiccup, it was still one of the happiest days of my life. It also reinforced a truth I'd known for a long time: my sister, even in her absence, could stir up storms in my life like no one else. As Mark and I drove away from the venue, my wedding dress bundled around me in the car, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I was married to the love of my life, but the family drama that had shadowed so much of my life, I realized that no matter how far I went, there would always be ties that bound me to my family and my sister. But now, with Mark by my side, I felt stronger and ready to face whatever came our way. We would navigate the complexities of family and carve out a space where peace and love could flourish, away from the shadows of the past. The wedding was over, but the echoes of that day, particularly the moment my dad decided to bring up my sister, lingered, like a bad aftertaste. I'd hoped that once Mark and I returned from our honeymoon, the dust would have settled. But if there's one thing I've learned from all this family drama, it's that some dust never really settles. It just waits for the next breeze to kick it up again. It wasn't long after we got back that the phone calls started. First, it was my mom. Her voice was a mix of concern and criticism, telling me how hurt she was. My dad was that I'd cut him off during his speech. She painted him as the victim, just a father caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace in the family. I listened, biting back the urge to remind her of all the times they hadn't kept the peace for me. Then came the call from my aunt, who'd always been more of a mediator in the family. She was gentler, suggesting maybe it was time to mend fences and let bygones be bygones. But how? Could I let bygones be bygones when the past kept coming up? The real kicker came one evening when I was cooking dinner and Mark handed me the phone. His eyebrows were knitted in concern. It was my dad. "Your mother. I think it's time we all had a talk." He said it in a stern, familiar tone of authority that had dictated much of my childhood. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my grip tightening around the phone. "We were going to talk about Dad, how you, Ed, my wedding." As a way to talk about her, he sighed heavily. It's not just about the wedding, it's about the rift in the family, it's about your sister, it's about us. I felt tiredness seep into my bones, the kind of tiredness that comes from having the same argument over and over. I don't see what there is to talk about. What's done is done. She made her choices, and I made mine. We're still your family, and I interrupted him. I was tired of waiting for him to understand. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about the years of frustration I'd been feeling. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my feelings. I wanted to know why he didn't seem to care about my well-being. I wanted to know why he didn't. In my kitchen, I could still hear the echoes of the conversation from the following weeks. Everyone had something to say, a piece of advice to offer, or a judgment to pass. It seemed like my family had plenty of voices, but not many listeners. The real confrontation, however, was still to come. It happened at a family gathering, a few months later. It was a birthday party for my uncle. I'd been reluctant to go, but Mark convinced me that it might be a chance to clear the air. Maybe it's time for that. The party was in full swing when we arrived. The backyard was buzzing with relatives and laughter. I plastered on a smile and prepared to play the part of the dutiful niece for the evening. But then I saw her, my sister, standing there across the yard, laughing, her head thrown back in that carefree way she had. My heart stopped just for a moment, and all the old wounds flared up again. I was about to turn and leave when she spotted me and started walking over. Every step she took felt like an intrusion, like she was violating the distance I'd put between us. "Hey," she said, her voice casual as if we were just two acquaintances at a party. "Hi," I replied, my voice cool and distant. She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "Look, things have been bad between us, but I'm hoping we can start to move past it." I felt like I could move past it. "How can I do that? How can you stand there and act like what you did was just some minor mistake?" She flinched, but then her face settled into a mask of defiance. "I made a mistake." "I know, but aren't families supposed to forgive? Forgiveness doesn't erase the consequences," I said, my voice steady, despite the shaking inside. "What you did, what you chose to do, it changed everything." The conversation grew heated. Voices raised old grievances. They aired like dirty laundry. Relatives turned to look. A semicircle formed around us, like some twisted audience waiting to see how the drama would unfold. I'd had enough. "This isn't the time or the place." I cut through the noise. "I don't think there will ever be a right time or place for us to resolve this." I walked away, leaving her standing there among the whispers and stares. Mark was at my side in an instant. His presence was a comforting warmth. The next day was eerily quiet. Normally, my phone would be buzzing with texts and calls from family members trying to mediate or take sides, but today it was silent. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mark saw my anxiety and tried to lighten the mood, but the tension was thick as a fog in our home. Then the call started. First, it was my aunt, the family peacemaker. Her voice was soft and worried. "You know, your parents are just devastated," she began, but I cut her off. "Linda, I love you, but I can't do this right." I needed some space. I could tell she was hurt, but she understood. Next was my mom. She was angry and disappointed. "How could you embarrass us like that in front of the whole family?" she demanded. I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's always about you, isn't it?" she shot back, before hanging up. The words stung, echoing in my mind long after the call ended. Days turned into weeks, and the divide within the family deepened. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out, some to offer support, others to criticize. My decision to cut ties with my sister had ripple effects I hadn't anticipated, affecting relationships I thought were unshakable. The hardest hit, unsurprisingly, was my relationship with my parents. They were caught between their two daughters, one they had always favored and another I didn't know how to support without causing conflict. Conversations with them were strained, filled with awkward silences and unsaid words. As for my sister, she became a topic we all avoided. It was as if mentioning her might reignite the flames we were all desperately trying to smother. But avoidance didn't heal the wounds, it just covered them up for a while. Mark and I found ourselves discussing our future, contemplating moves and changes that would put physical distance between us and my family. Maybe a fresh start is what we need. One evening, Mark suggested, "What we need is a fresh start." He had his arm around me as we sat watching the sunset from our porch. I thought about it. A new city, new jobs, new people, it was tempting. But then I realized that running away wasn't the answer. I needed to face this and rebuild my life on my terms. So, instead of running, I focused on building. I threw myself into work and my passions. I started a blog sharing my experiences and connecting with others who had gone through similar family estrangements. The response was overwhelming. I found a sense of purpose in helping others navigate their own turbulent family waters. I shared my experiences and connected with others who had gone through similar family estrangements. The response was overwhelming, and I found a sense of purpose in helping others navigate their own turbulent family waters. Mark and I also worked on strengthening our bond, knowing that our foundation needed to be solid if we were to weather the storms together. We attended couples therapy, learned better communication skills, and made sure to carve out time for each other away from the shadow of my family drama. Months passed, and slowly the sharp edges, some family members drifted away, unable or unwilling to accept my decisions. Others surprisingly grew closer. Their support was a balm on the raw edges of my hurt. Holidays were the hardest. The first Christmas after the confrontation, I declined the family gathering, choosing instead to volunteer at a local shelter. It was bittersweet. Serving others while knowing my own family was fractured was a difficult but empowering experience. It was a step toward reclaiming my agency and how I chose to live my life. As for my parents, our relationship eventually found a new normal. It was never the same as it had been before, but maybe that was okay. We learned to navigate around the sensitive topics and focus on the here and now, rather than the tangled past. My sister and I didn't speak for years. It was a silence that spoke volumes. We were living our lives in parallel universes that rarely intersected. I heard about her through the family grapevine, her kids, her moves, her. It was strange hearing about someone who had once been my closest confidant as if she were a distant acquaintance. In the end, the confrontation and its fallout taught me a lot about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I had thought, capable of making tough decisions for the sake of my own health and happiness. I learned that family isn't always defined by blood but by the people who stand by you when the ground falls away. I learned that healing is not. It was a winding road, with plenty of ups and downs. The best way to get through it was to be honest, resilient, and hopeful. The fallout was messy, painful, and complicated, but it also led to a new beginning. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's drama. With each passing day, I grew more confident that I could face the future on my own terms.